She didn't scream. She didn't beg. When Richard Sterling fired her in front of the entire board, Sarah Mitchell didn't even slam the door on her way out. She just adjusted her glasses, picked up her single box of belongings, and walked toward the elevator. The room erupted in laughter, the sound of arrogant men who thought they had just trimmed the fat. They thought they had won. But they forgot one thing. Sarah wasn't just the head of operations. She was the architect of their entire reality. As the elevator doors slid shut, hiding her face, the laughter upstairs continued. But 45 minutes later, the first phone started ringing. And it didn't stop until Richard's empire was nothing but ash. This is the story of how silence became the loudest weapon in the room. The boardroom on the 45th floor of the Sterling Hargrave building in downtown Chicago smelled of expensive leather, stale coffee, and unbridled arrogance. It was 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of grey, rainy morning that makes the lights inside a skyscraper feel artificial and harsh. Richard Sterling sat at the head of the mahogany table, spinning a Mont Blanc pen between his fingers. He was a man who had been told yes his entire life, first by his father, then by his professors at Wharton, and finally by the sycophants he had hired to populate his C-suite. He was 55, tanned from a recent trip to St. Bart's, and currently wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars. To his right sat Jessica Vane, the new director of strategy, a woman Richard had poached from a rival firm only 3 months ago. She was sharp, aggressive, and had spent the last 90 days systematically dismantling the reputation of the woman sitting at the far end of the table. That woman was Sarah Mitchell. Sarah looked nothing like the rest of them. While Jessica wore sharp, tailored blazers and Richard wore Italian silk, Sarah wore a sensible grey cardigan and kept her hair in a messy bun. She was 42, quiet, and possessed a stillness that unnerved people. She had been with Sterling Hargrave for 15 years, starting as a junior analyst and working her way up to chief operations officer. She knew where every dollar was buried. She knew why the Q3 projections were inflated. She knew the passwords to the legacy servers. But today, none of that mattered. Today, she was the scapegoat. "Sarah," Richard said, his voice smooth, lacking any genuine remorse. "We've reviewed the efficiency reports for the last quarter. The numbers aren't adding up, and, frankly, we feel the department needs a fresher perspective." He didn't look her in the eye. He looked at Jessica, who offered a thin, predatory smile. "We're pivoting to an AI-driven logistics model," Jessica added, tapping her tablet. "Your manual oversight protocols are frankly archaic, Sarah. They're slowing down our merger with Oakhaven Capital. We need speed. We need aggression. You're just too cautious." Sarah looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking. "The Oakhaven merger is a mistake, Richard," she said softly. "I've told you this. Their debt-to-equity ratio is falsified. If you integrate their systems with ours without a manual audit, you expose our entire client database to their unsecured servers. It's a ticking time bomb." Richard laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. "Always the doomsayer, Sarah. This is exactly what we're talking about. You're afraid of growth. You're afraid of the future." "I'm afraid of bankruptcy," Sarah corrected, her voice steady. The room went silent for a beat, but it wasn't a respectful silence. It was the silence of a predator cornering prey. "We're letting you go, Sarah," Richard said, dropping the pretense. "Effective immediately. Security is waiting outside to escort you. We've prepared a severance package. Standard, of course. 2 weeks' pay." 15 years. 2 weeks' pay. Sarah looked up. For the first time, she looked Richard directly in the eyes. There was no sadness in her gaze. There was no anger. There was only a terrifying clarity. "You're firing me 2 days before the Oakhaven signing?" she asked. "We're trimming the fat," Jessica interjected. "We want a clean slate for the press release." Sarah nodded slowly. She stood up. She didn't argue. She didn't beg for her pension, which she knew they were probably finding a loophole to deny her. She simply closed her laptop, her personal laptop, and placed it in her bag. "Okay," Sarah said. "Okay?" Richard blinked, expecting a fight. He wanted a fight. It made him feel powerful to crush resistance. "If that is the board's decision, I accept it," Sarah said. "I will leave my badge at the front desk." She turned and walked toward the heavy glass doors. "Don't forget to leave the key card for the server room," Jessica called out, her voice dripping with mockery. "We wouldn't want you sneaking back in to manually audit the coffee machine." The board members chuckled. A few of the junior VPs, eager to please Richard, laughed louder. It echoed off the glass walls. Sarah paused at the door. She didn't look back. She just reached into her pocket, pulled out a small encrypted USB drive, the master authentication key for the entire internal banking architecture, and set it gently on the side table near the door. "I won't be needing this," she whispered to herself. She walked out. The laughter followed her down the hall. They laughed because they thought she was a relic. They laughed because they thought she was weak. They didn't realize that Sarah Mitchell wasn't the fat. She was the skeleton. And they had just removed the spine of the company. The first hour after Sarah left was celebratory. Richard opened a bottle of scotch, a Macallan 25, that he had been saving for the merger signing. He poured a glass for Jessica and one for himself. "To the future," Richard toasted, clinking his glass against hers. "And to getting rid of the dead weight." She was depressing to be around, Jessica agreed, taking a sip, always talking about compliance and regulatory hurdles. "It's 2024, Richard. If you aren't breaking things, you aren't moving fast enough." "Exactly," Richard grinned. "Now get Oakhaven on the phone. Tell them the obstacle is gone. We signed the merger at 4:10 p.m. today. I want that stock price to double by the time the market opens tomorrow." The atmosphere in the office was electric. The junior traders were high-fiving. The marketing team was already drafting the press release about the new era of Sterling Hargrave. At 10:15 a.m., the first crack appeared. It started in the IT department, located 3 floors down. Kevin, the systems administrator, a nervous man with a caffeine addiction, frowned at his monitor. He was trying to authorize a routine transfer of funds, $500,000 for vendor payments. He clicked approve. The screen flashed red. "Error 404, authorization certificate missing." Kevin blinked. He tried again. "Error 404, authorization certificate missing." "That's weird," Kevin muttered. He picked up his phone and dialed the extension for the COO's office. He was used to calling Sarah whenever the system hiccuped. Sarah built the system. Sarah knew the overrides. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. "Pick up, Sarah," Kevin hissed. Then he remembered. The email had gone out 20 minutes ago. Sarah Mitchell is no longer with the company. "Right," Kevin sighed. "I guess I'll call Jessica." He dialed the director of strategy. "What is it?" Jessica snapped, answering on the second ring. She was in the middle of a celebratory lunch order. "Ms. Vane, this is Kevin from IT. We have a small glitch with the vendor payments. The system is asking for a legacy auth certificate. Usually, Sarah just inputs her master code and it clears. I need the new code." Jessica rolled her eyes. "We don't have time for this, Kevin. Just bypass it. Use the admin override." I can't," Kevin said, his voice trembling slightly. The admin override was Sarah. The system was designed so that any transaction over 10,000 requires a dual signature digital key, I have one half. Sarah had the other. So reset the password, Jessica yelled. It's not a password, Mum. It's a bio-encrypted hard key, a physical drive. Without it, the accounts lock down automatically after— Wait. Kevin looked at the timer on his screen. Oh, God. What? Jessica demanded. If the key isn't detected within 60 minutes of a flagged transaction, the system assumes a hostile breach, Kevin said, his face draining of color. It initiates the dead man's switch protocol. English, Kevin. It freezes the assets, Kevin whispered. All of them, to prevent theft. Well, fix it. Jessica slammed the phone down. She looked at Richard, who was admiring his reflection in the window. Problem? Richard asked lazily. IT issue. Jessica waved a hand dismissively. Some legacy password Sarah forgot to leave. I'll have the tech boys wipe the server and reset it. 10 minutes tops. Richard nodded. Good. Oakhaven's CEO, David Thorne, is arriving in 2 hours. I don't want any technical hiccups. 11 a.m. The lobby of Sterling Hargrave was bustling. Couriers were running back and forth. But on the trading floor, the noise level had dropped from a roar to a confused murmur. Hey, can you access the client liquidity pool? One trader asked another. No, I'm getting a access denied message. Says awaiting COO verification. I'm getting it too. Me too. A ripple of panic moved through the room. Screens were turning red. One by one, the trading terminals, the lifeblood of the company, were locking down. Up in the boardroom, Richard's cell phone rang. It was David Thorne, the CEO of Oakhaven. David! Richard boomed, putting on his best charming voice. We're just chilling the champagne for your arrival. Richard, David's voice was icy. My compliance officer just called me. We tried to run the preliminary escrow test for the merger funds. The transfer bounced. Richard froze. That's impossible. We have 50 million in liquid reserves sitting in that account. The message says, account frozen. Security Protocol Delta. Richard, do you have a liquidity problem you didn't tell me about? No, absolutely not, Richard stammered, sweat instantly pricking his forehead. It's a minor IT glitch. We're upgrading our servers today. Bad timing, that's all. You have 1 hour, Richard, David said. If that money isn't verifiable by noon, the deal is off, and I will publicly state that Sterling Hargrave is insolvent. Click. Richard stared at the phone. He looked at Jessica. Get it up here. Now. 10 minutes later, Kevin was standing in the boardroom, sweating through his shirt. He was typing furiously on a laptop connected to the main projector. Talk to me, Richard barked. It's the Ghost Protocol, Kevin said, his voice cracking. Sarah wrote it 5 years ago after that cyber attack scare. It wraps the entire core database in a shell. It requires a physical token to unlock, specifically a USB drive with a rolling encryption key. Richard's eyes widened. He remembered the small silver object Sarah had placed on the table by the door. He spun around. The table! She left it on the table! Jessica ran to the side table near the door. It was empty. The cleaning crew, Jessica gasped. They came in right after she left to clear the room. Richard sprinted into the hallway. Janitorial. Where is the janitorial staff? They found the cleaning cart by the elevators. A confused elderly woman, named Maria, was emptying a trash bin. The drive, Richard yelled, scaring the poor woman. Small silver USB drive. Where is it? Maria looked terrified. I throw away trash, all trash, in compactor. The compactor? Richard grabbed her shoulders. Where does the compactor go? Basement, Maria whispered. Incinerator runs at 11:30. Richard looked at his watch. It was 11:15. Stop the incinerator, Richard screamed at Jessica. Go! But even as Jessica ran for the elevators, Kevin shook his head. Mr. Sterling, it might not matter. Why? Richard snarled. Because, Kevin pointed at the screen. Look at the command line. The system didn't just lock because the key was missing. It locked because an external command was sent to it. What command? Kevin typed a few lines. Text scrolled up the screen. User, S. Mitchell. Status, terminated action. Revoke all administrative privileges. Trigger, dead man's switch. Note, good luck with the manual audit. She didn't just leave, Kevin said, awe in his voice. She knew you fired her, and when you revoked her email access at 9:45, that was the trigger. The system interpreted her firing as a hostile takeover, because her clearance level was higher than yours, Mr. Sterling. Higher than mine? I own the company. Technically, Kevin said. Sarah built the company's brain. You just own the paperwork. The system thinks you are the intruder. Richard slumped into his chair. The laughter from 2 hours ago felt like a distant memory. Call her, Richard whispered. Jessica, out of breath from running back from the elevator, pulled out her phone. I'm calling. She put it on speaker. Ring. Ring. Hello? Sarah's voice was calm. In the background, they could hear the hiss of an espresso machine and the chatter of a coffee shop. Sarah, Richard yelled, we have a problem. I don't work there anymore, Richard, Sarah said pleasantly. I believe you said you were trimming the fat. Listen to me, Richard hissed. The system is locked. The Oakhaven deal is in 40 minutes. We need the bypass code. I don't have a code, Sarah said. I left the key on the table. Did you lose it? It's gone. Sarah, you have to come back. Right now. We'll pay you for the day. There was a pause on the other end. I'm afraid I can't do that, Richard. I have a lunch appointment. With who? Richard demanded. Who is more important than $100 million merger? With the SEC, Sarah said. The blood drained from Richard's face so fast he looked like a corpse. The Securities and Exchange Commission? Yes, Sarah said. You see that fat you trimmed? It was the only thing hiding the fact that you've been using client funds to cover your personal losses in the crypto market for the last 6 months. I was manually balancing the ledgers every night to keep the alarms from tripping, hoping you'd fix it. But since I'm gone, well, the automated audit just ran. Sarah, wait, Richard's voice trembled. Don't do this. I didn't do anything, Richard. I just walked away. You're the one who decided to navigate without a pilot. Name your price, Richard begged. 5 million. 10. Cash. Just tell the SEC it was a mistake. Come back and fix the code. It's too late, Sarah said. They're already here. Oh, and Richard? What? I'd suggest you call your lawyer. But since you fired the legal team last month to save money, maybe just call your wife. Click. The line went dead. Richard looked at the phone. Then he looked at the window. Down below, on the street, he could see sirens flashing, blue and red lights reflecting against the grey Chicago rain. They weren't coming for Sarah. The arrival of the authorities at the Sterling Hargrave building wasn't like the movies. There were no SWAT teams rappelling down the side of the glass tower, no helicopters hovering ominously at eye level. It was far more clinical, and somehow far more terrifying. At 11:45 a.m., exactly 15 minutes before the Oakhaven merger was set to be signed, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up to the curb. Men and women in windbreakers bearing the letters FBI and SEC stepped out. They moved with the synchronized purpose of a colony of ants dismantling a dead beetle. Up on the 45th floor, panic had mutated into hysteria. "Shred it! Shred everything!" Richard was screaming, throwing papers into the air. He was on his knees by the main server rack in the conference room, trying to physically rip hard drives out of the wall. but the casing was reinforced steel, another one of Sarah's security measures. "I can't access the digital logs," Jessica Vane cried from her laptop. Her perfectly curated composure had dissolved. Her mascara was running. "The Ghost Protocol locked the cloud backups too, Richard. We can't delete the emails, the chats. It's all frozen." "Sarah!" Richard roared, smashing his fist against the metal server cabinet. "She planned this. She knew." The elevator doors chimed. Richard spun around, expecting to see security, or perhaps Sarah returning to save him. Instead, he saw Agent Thomas Miller, a man with a face like carved granite and a warrant in his hand. Behind him stood 6 other agents. "Richard Sterling," Agent Miller said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Step away from the equipment." "This is a misunderstanding," Richard stammered, smoothing his disheveled hair. He tried to summon the arrogance that had served him for 30 years. "I'm in the middle of a billion-dollar merger. Who is your supervisor? I play golf with the Attorney General." "Not anymore, you don't," Miller said dryly. "We've been monitoring the liquidity discrepancies in your crypto accounts for 3 months. We just needed the internal confirmation. Your former COO provided the encryption keys to the forensic ledger about 20 minutes ago." Richard felt the room spin. "She gave you the keys?" "She walked into our field office, handed us a drive, and gave a sworn statement." Miller nodded to his team. "Seize the terminals. Nobody touches a keyboard. Jessica Vane?" Jessica froze. She looked at Richard, then at the agents. Survival instinct kicked in. "I just started 3 months ago," Jessica shrieked. "I didn't know about the embezzlement. I was just following orders. He told me the funds were secured." "You signed the Q3 strategy report, knowingly inflating asset values," Miller said, signaling an agent to cuff her. "That's securities fraud, Miss Vane." "Richard made me!" she screamed as she was led away, her heels dragging on the carpet. Richard watched her go. He looked at the window. Below, the news vans were already arriving. The crawl on CNBC was probably already flashing red. "Sterling Hargrave, raided." Merger halted. "Mr. Sterling," Miller said, taking out a pair of steel handcuffs. "Turn around." As the cold metal clicked around Richard's wrists, his phone buzzed on the mahogany table. It was a text message from David Thorne, the CEO of Oakhaven. It was just 3 words. "Deal is dead." While Richard was being perp-walked out of his own building, shielding his face from the blinding flash of paparazzi cameras, Sarah Mitchell was sitting in a quiet diner 3 blocks away. She ordered a chamomile tea and a slice of lemon pie. She watched the news on the small television mounted in the corner. Breaking news. Financial titan, Richard Sterling, arrested in massive fraud scheme. Stock price plummets 94% in 1 hour. The waitress poured her hot water. "Can you believe that?" the waitress asked, gesturing to the TV. "Rich guys, they think they can get away with anything." Sarah blew on her tea. "They usually do, until they forget who counts the money." Her phone buzzed. It was a call from an unknown number. Sarah knew who it was. She picked up. "Mrs. Mitchell?" A frantic voice on the other end. It was Catherine Sterling, Richard's wife. "Hello, Catherine," Sarah said calmly. "Sarah, please," Catherine was sobbing. "The bank just called. They froze our joint accounts. They froze the house assets. They're saying Richard leveraged our personal estate to cover company losses? Is it true?" "I warned him, Catherine," Sarah said, her voice not without sympathy, but firm. 6 months ago, at the gala. Do you remember? I told you to check the trust funds for the children. I told you to separate your assets." "I thought you were just jealous," Catherine cried. "Richard said you were bitter because he wouldn't give you equity. Sarah, please, the kids. Their tuition. Is there anything left? Sarah took a sip of her tea. "The company is gone, Catherine. The assets are toxic. But what?" "I didn't give the feds everything," Sarah lied smoothly. "I gave them the company ledgers. I didn't give them the private trust documents regarding your inheritance from your father. If those were to disappear, the feds couldn't seize that money." "Oh God, Sarah, do you have them?" "They are in a safety deposit box. I have the only key." "I'll give you anything," Catherine begged. "Please." "I don't want money, Catherine. I want the truth. I want you to testify." "Testify? Against Richard?" "He's going to try to pin this on me," Sarah said. "He's going to say I was the mastermind. I need you to testify that he forged my signature on the authorization forms. I know you saw him do it that night in the study. You were there." There was a long silence on the line. Catherine Sterling loved her lifestyle. She loved her status. But right now, Richard was a sinking ship, and Sarah was the only lifeboat. "I saw him," Catherine whispered. "Good," Sarah said. "I'll see you in court." She hung up. Sarah didn't actually have the trust documents in a safety deposit box. The feds already had those too. But she knew Catherine. Catherine was a survivor, just like Jessica. They would eat their own to survive. Sarah finished her pie. It tasted like victory. 6 months later. The federal courthouse in Chicago was a fortress of limestone and judgment. The trial of United States versus Richard Sterling had become the media spectacle of the decade. The prosecution was calling it the Glass House Ponzi. Richard sat at the defense table. He had lost weight. His tan was gone, replaced by a prison pallor. He wore a cheap suit his lawyer had bought for him, because all his bespoke Italian ones were in evidence lockers. His lawyer, a frantic man named Arthur Polt, who specialized in impossible cases, stood up. "Your Honor," Polt bellowed, pacing before the jury, "the prosecution wants you to believe Richard Sterling is a criminal mastermind, but the facts show otherwise. Mr. Sterling is a visionary, a big-picture thinker. He didn't understand the minutiae of the accounting codes." Polt pointed a shaking finger at the prosecution's table, where Sarah sat next to the district attorney. "She did!" Polt shouted. "Sarah Mitchell, the chief operations officer, the architect as she called herself. She built the system. She created the Ghost Protocol. She locked Mr. Sterling out of his own company. This was a coup, ladies and gentlemen. A digital mutiny designed to frame an innocent man." Richard nodded vigorously, trying to look like a victim. It was a good narrative, the evil secretary trope. The jury looked at Sarah. She looked plain, unassuming, almost boring. Could she really be a hacker genius who framed her boss? The district attorney, a sharp woman named Eleanor Ross, stood up. The prosecution called Sarah Mitchell to the stand. Sarah walked to the witness box. She swore on the Bible. She sat down and adjusted her glasses. "Ms. Mitchell," Eleanor asked, "Mr. Sterling claims you engineered the system to fail, that you locked him out maliciously. Is that true?" "No," Sarah said calmly. "I engineered the system to comply with federal banking regulations known as Sarbanes-Oxley. The Ghost Protocol isn't a weapon. It's a safety brake. It triggers only when someone attempts an unauthorized transfer of funds exceeding 10% of the company's value without board approval." "And who attempted that transfer?" "Richard Sterling," Sarah said. "On the morning of January 7th, he tried to move $50 million from the client escrow account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands to pay off his gambling debts." "Objection!" Polt screamed. "Hearsay." "I have the logs," Sarah said, pulling a thick binder from her bag. "And I have the audio." The courtroom went silent. "Audio?" the judge asked. "Mr. Sterling installed a voice-activated trading system in his office last year," Sarah explained. He thought it made him look like Tony Stark. He didn't realize that voice-activated systems record audio to process commands. These recordings are stored on a separate, localized server, one that I manually audited. Sarah looked at Richard. His eyes were wide with terror. "Please play Exhibit G," Sarah said. The audio played over the courtroom speakers. It was grainy, but clear. Richard's voice. "Jessica, just fudge the numbers. I don't care if Sarah catches it later. Once the Oakhaven money hits, we fill the hole, and nobody knows. If Sarah tries to stop it, we fire her. We ruin her. We'll say she was incompetent. Who are they going to believe? The billionaire or the librarian?" The courtroom erupted. The jury gasped. Richard put his head in his hands, but Sarah wasn't done. "Mr. Sterling tried to blame me for the collapse," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "But the truth is, I spent 15 years keeping that company afloat despite him. I worked 80-hour weeks correcting his mistakes. I covered his tracks not to help him steal, but to protect the jobs of the 400 employees he didn't care about." She turned to the jury. "When he fired me, he didn't just fire an employee. He fired the conscience of the company. And without a conscience, the system did exactly what it was designed to do. It committed suicide to prevent the infection from spreading." It was a powerful speech, but Richard's lawyer had one last desperate card to play. "Ms. Mitchell," Polt shouted on cross-examination, "you claim to be moral. Yet isn't it true you are currently being sued by Oakhaven Capital for negligence? Isn't it true that if Mr. Sterling goes down, you are personally liable for the insurance premiums?" This was the trap. If Sarah was liable, she had a motive to pin it on Richard to clear her name. Sarah smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in court. "Actually, Mr. Polt," Sarah said, "I'm not liable. And why is that?" "Because," Sarah said, leaning into the microphone, 3 days before I was fired, I exercised a clause in my contract, the whistleblower protection clause. I formally resigned as the insurance guarantor and transferred the liability to the primary shareholder." Polt froze. "The primary shareholder?" "Yes," Sarah said. "But since Richard had already leveraged his shares, the liability passed to the secondary guarantor listed on the trust." Sarah looked toward the back of the courtroom. Mrs. Catherine Sterling. Catherine stood up in the gallery. She looked at Richard with pure hatred. She had testified against him yesterday, thinking it would save her fortune. Now she realized Sarah had outmaneuvered them both. "You," Richard whispered, looking at his wife, then at Sarah. "You played us against each other." "No, Richard," Sarah said softly. "I just balanced the ledger. You and your wife spent years spending money that belonged to your employees' pension funds. Now you both pay the bill." The gavel banged. "Order! Order!" But the damage was done. The jury wasn't looking at a disgruntled employee anymore. They were looking at a woman who had meticulously, legally, and brutally dismantled a corrupt dynasty from the inside out. As Sarah stepped down from the stand, she walked past Richard's table. "You called me illiterate once," she whispered, loud enough for only him to hear. "You said I was just a glorified secretary." Richard looked up, tears in his eyes. "I read the fine print, Richard," Sarah said. "You should have too." The gavel came down with a sound that seemed to shatter the last remnants of Richard Sterling's life. "Richard Sterling, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole for the first 15. The courtroom gasped, but it was a gasp of satisfaction, not shock. The evidence Sarah had provided was overwhelming. The audio recordings, the forensic ledgers, the ghost protocol logs. It painted a picture of a man so consumed by greed that he would cannibalize his own company to feed it. Richard didn't scream this time. He didn't bluster. He simply slumped in his chair, looking smaller than anyone had ever seen him. As the marshals moved in to cuff him, he looked back at the gallery. He wasn't looking for his wife, Catherine. He was looking for Sarah. Sarah met his gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just nodded, a simple acknowledgement of a transaction completed. As the marshals dragged Richard away, the media swarm turned its attention to the two women left in the wreckage, Sarah Mitchell and Catherine Sterling. Catherine was sitting in the front row, trembling. She had testified against her husband, hoping for leniency, hoping to save the mansion in the Hamptons and the penthouse in London. She clutched her Chanel bag like a lifeline. But as the courtroom cleared, an agent from the IRS approached Catherine. "Mrs. Sterling?" the agent asked, his tone polite but firm. "Yes?" Catherine stood up, wiping her eyes. "Is it over? Can I go home?" "I'm afraid not, ma'am," the agent said. As Ms. Mitchell testified, the liability clause for the company's debts transferred to the secondary guarantor when the primary default occurred. Since you are the co-trustee of the Sterling Family Trust, the government has placed a lien on all your personal assets to repay the pension fund. Catherine's face went white. "All of them?" "The house, the cars, the jewelry, the offshore accounts," the agent listed. "We have a team at your residence now cataloguing the items. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." But Sarah said..." Catherine spun around, her eyes wild. She spotted Sarah near the exit, putting on her coat. "Sarah!" Catherine screamed, running down the aisle. "You lied to me! You said if I testified, the trust would be safe." Sarah stopped. She turned slowly. The press cameras were flashing through the glass doors, capturing the confrontation. "I never said the trust would be safe, Catherine," Sarah said calmly. "I said the feds wouldn't seize it if the documents disappeared. But the documents didn't disappear. You gave them to me. I gave them to you to hide. And I gave them to the pension fund managers," Sarah said, "to make sure the 400 families your husband stole from get their retirement money back." "You ruined me," Catherine shrieked, lunging forward, but a bailiff held her back. "I have nothing. I've never worked a day in my life. What am I supposed to do?" Sarah looked at the woman who had once sneered at her cheap shoes and boring lifestyle. "You're smart, Catherine," Sarah said, echoing the words Richard had used when he fired her. "I'm sure you can find an entry-level position somewhere. I hear the coffee shop down the street is hiring. It's hard work, but it's honest." Sarah pushed open the heavy courtroom doors and stepped out into the blinding light of the paparazzi. "Ms. Mitchell! Ms. Mitchell!" the reporters shouted. "How does it feel to take down a giant? Are you a hero? A vigilante?" Sarah stopped at the bottom of the steps. She adjusted her glasses. "I'm just an operations manager," she said into the microphones. "I like things to be efficient. Corruption is inefficient." She walked through the crowd, hailed a taxi, and vanished into the city. For the next few months, the fallout was nuclear. Sterling Hargrave was dissolved. The assets were liquidated. The name Sterling became toxic, synonymous with fraud. Richard was serving his time in a medium security facility in upstate New York, working in the laundry room for 12 cents an hour. Catherine Sterling moved into a small apartment in a less desirable part of the city. The tabloids ran photos of her, pawning her designer handbags. But Sarah went quiet. She declined book deals. She declined movie rights. She sat in her small apartment, watching the snow fall over Chicago, and waited. She knew that destruction was the easy part. Creation, that was where the real work began. 1 year later, the building at 400 South Wacker Drive had been vacant for 12 months. It was a prime location, overlooking the river, but the stigma of its previous tenant Sterling Hargrave, kept buyers away. The sign on the building had been removed, leaving a ghostly outline of letters on the stone facade. On a crisp Tuesday morning, a moving truck pulled up. A woman stepped out of a modest sedan behind the truck. She wore a sharp, tailored navy suit. Her hair was no longer in a messy bun. It was cut in a sleek, professional bob. It was Sarah Mitchell. She wasn't alone. Getting out of the passenger side was Kevin, the former IT administrator who had helped her expose the logs. Behind him was Maria, the cleaning lady who Richard had screamed at about the USB drive, and pulling up in other cars were dozens of other familiar faces, former analysts, accountants, and logistics coordinators who had been fired by Richard or let go during the liquidation. They gathered on the sidewalk, looking up at the glass tower. "It looks different," Kevin said, adjusting his glasses. "It's just a building, Kevin," Sarah said, holding a set of keys. "It's the people inside that make it good or bad." Sarah walked to the glass doors and unlocked them. She held the door open. "Welcome to Veritas Logistics," she said. The news broke an hour later. Whistleblower Sarah Mitchell buys former Sterling HQ for pennies on the dollar. The business world was skeptical. "She's an operator, not a visionary," the pundits said on TV. "She knows how to count beans, not how to grow them. Veritas Logistics will fail within a year." But they underestimated Sarah. Again. Veritas didn't operate like a normal logistics firm. Sarah instituted a radical policy. Open books. Every employee, from the janitor to the directors, could see the company's financials in real time. There were no hidden accounts, no black box expenses. Clients, tired of being ripped off by hidden fees and opaque pricing from competitors, flocked to Veritas. Oakhaven Capital, under new management after David Thorne was ousted for his negligence, was the first to sign a contract. "We trust you, Sarah," the new Oakhaven CEO said, "because we know you're the only person in this city who can't be bought." However, not everyone was happy about Sarah's return. 3 months after the launch, Sarah was in her office, Richard's old office, though she had removed the mahogany desk and replaced it with a simple, functional glass table. Her assistant buzzed her. "Miss Mitchell, there is a gentleman here to see you. He says he's an old friend." Sarah checked her schedule. It was empty. "Send him in." The door opened, and a man walked in. He was tall, wearing a suit that was expensive but dated. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was Charles "Chuck" Hargrave, the silent partner of the original firm, the man who had retired 5 years ago with his millions, leaving Richard in charge. "Sarah," Chuck said, spreading his arms. "The place looks Spartan." "It's efficient, Chuck," Sarah said, not standing up. "What do you want?" Chuck sat down without being asked. "I'm impressed, really. You took the wreckage and built a raft. But let's be honest, you're playing in the big leagues now. You need capital to expand. You need connections. You need the old boys club." "I seem to be doing fine without the club," Sarah said, tapping her screen. "We're up 40% this quarter." "Peanuts," Chuck scoffed. "Look, I'm putting a consortium together. We want to buy you out. Veritas is cute, but it's small. We'll give you a nice payout. You can retire, go to Italy, find a husband." Sarah took off her glasses and cleaned them slowly. "You want to buy Veritas?" "We're offering 20 million, Chuck said. "Take it. Or what?" Chuck's smile vanished. "Or we bury you. I still have friends in this town, Sarah. Regulators, union bosses, suppliers. If you don't sell, you'll find that your shipments start getting lost. Your permits get delayed. Your staff gets poached." It was the same old threat, the same bully tactic Richard had used for decades. Sarah put her glasses back on. She pressed a button on her desk phone. "Kevin, can you come in here, please?" Kevin walked in a moment later, holding a tablet. "Yes, Ms. Mitchell." "Chuck here says he's going to use his connections to disrupt our supply chain," Sarah said pleasantly. "Show him the map." Kevin tapped the tablet and cast the image to the large screen on the wall. It showed a map of the global logistics network. Thousands of green lines connecting ports, airports, and warehouses. "What is this?" Chuck asked, frowning. "This," Sarah said, standing up, "is the Veritas network. You see, Chuck, while you and Richard were playing golf, I spent 15 years building relationships with the actual people who do the work. The dock foreman in Shanghai, the union rep in New Jersey, the truck dispatchers in Berlin. They don't care about your old boys club. They care that I pay them on time and treat them with respect." She leaned over the desk. "I didn't just buy the building, Chuck. I inherited the loyalty of the people you ignored. If you try to block my shipments, you'll find that your consortium is the one that suddenly can't move a single container." Chuck stared at the map. He realized with a sinking feeling that the game had changed. The power wasn't in the boardroom anymore. It was in the network. "Now," Sarah said, sitting back down, "get out of my office. I have a company to run." Chuck left without another word, but Sarah knew he wouldn't give up that easily. The old boys never did. They would come back, harder and dirtier, and to defeat them completely, she would need to do something Richard never could. She would need to expand, not just for profit, but for power. She picked up the phone. "Get me the mayor," she said. "Tell him Veritas Logistics is interested in the city's failing infrastructure contract. Tell him we can fix it in 6 months, for half the price." The empire was growing, but unlike Richard's house of cards, this one was being built with steel. The winter of 2026 was one for the history books. Meteorologists called it a bomb cyclone, but to the people of Chicago, it was simply the whiteout. In early February, the temperature plummeted to 20 below zero. Then, the snow began. It didn't stop for 3 days. The city, usually resilient against winter, buckled. The municipal infrastructure, weakened by years of budget cuts and corrupt contracts, collapsed. The city's official snow removal and emergency logistics provider was a company called Metrolink, a subsidiary quietly owned by Chuck Hargrave's consortium. They held the exclusive contract to clear the highways and deliver emergency medical supplies to hospitals. But on day 2 of the blizzard, the plows didn't run. The trucks didn't move. Chuck sat in his warm penthouse, sipping brandy. He was on the phone with the mayor. "It's a labor dispute, Mr. Mayor," Chuck lied smoothly. "My drivers are refusing to go out in this weather without hazard pay, triple time, plus a renegotiation of the 10-year contract. If you sign the extension now, I can probably get them on the road by midnight." It was extortion. Chuck was holding the city hostage while ambulances were stuck in snowbanks. He knew the mayor was desperate. He thought he had won. But he forgot that Sarah Mitchell was listening. At Veritas Logistics, the mood was military. The office was buzzing with activity, powered by backup generators. Sarah stood in the center of the war room, a massive digital map of the city glowing before her. "Metrolink is holding the fleet," Kevin reported, his fingers flying across a keyboard. "They aren't moving. Memorial Hospital is down to 4 hours of oxygen. St. Jude's is out of insulin." Sarah looked at the map. The arteries of the city were clogged red. "Chuck is betting on leverage," Sarah said, her voice cold steel. "He thinks logistics is about contracts. He forgets that logistics is about movement." She turned to her team. "Activate the Ghost Fleet." "Are you sure?" Kevin asked. We don't have the municipal permit. If we put our trucks on the road, Chuck will sue us for contract interference. The fines could bankrupt us." "Let him sue," Sarah said. "We'll fight the lawsuit later. Right now, people are dying. Call the independents." Kevin hit enter. The Ghost Fleet wasn't a spectral force. It was the network Sarah had told Chuck about. It was hundreds of independent truckers, owner-operators, and private contractors whom Sarah had treated with respect for 15 years. Men and women who had been squeezed out by Chuck's monopolies. Within 20 minutes, the radio channels crackled to life. "Veritas 1, this is Big Sal in the South Side. I've got my plow attached. Just give me a vector." "Veritas Command, this is Miller Transport. I have 3 reefers full of medical supplies idling in Gary. I'm ready to roll." "Go," Sarah commanded. While Chuck waited for the mayor's signature, a different kind of army took the streets. Veritas trucks, emblazoned with the simple blue V logo, tore through the drifts. They weren't just delivering goods, they were clearing the roads as they went. Sarah coordinated the entire operation from her desk, rerouting drivers in real time to avoid gridlock, prioritizing hospitals and shelters. She was a maestro, conducting a symphony of diesel and determination. By 4:00 a.m., the first convoy reached Memorial Hospital. The doctors cheered as the oxygen tanks were unloaded. By 6:00 a.m., the major arteries were clear. By 8:00 a.m., the news helicopters were in the air. They weren't filming Chuck's Metrolink trucks. They were filming the convoy of Veritas independents saving the city. Chuck watched the news in horror. He threw his brandy glass at the TV. He called his lawyers. "Sue her! Get an injunction! She's stealing my contract!" But the injunction never came. Because at 9 a.m., Sarah did something Chuck never expected. She held a press conference, not in a studio, but on the loading dock, wearing a heavy parka, standing next to the exhausted drivers. "Mr. Hargrave is threatening to sue us for saving lives," Sarah told the cameras. "He says we violated his exclusive right to service the city. So, I have a proposal." She looked directly into the lens. "I am releasing the logs of our operation. Every mile driven, every supply delivered. We did it at cost. We aren't charging the city a dime for the last 12 hours. If Mr. Hargrave wants to explain to a judge why he wants to be paid for work he didn't do while he held the city hostage for a contract extension, he is welcome to try." The public outcry was instantaneous. Social media exploded. Ratchet Team Sarah trended globally. The mayor, seeing the political winds shift, didn't just refuse Chuck's contract extension. He announced a fraud investigation into Metrolink's labor dispute, which turned out to be entirely fabricated by management. Chuck Hargrave's consortium collapsed within the week. The investors fled. The Old Boys Club dissolved, terrified of being associated with the man who tried to extort a freezing city. Sarah didn't bankrupt Veritas with the free aid. The goodwill she generated was worth billions. Contracts poured in from across the globe. Veritas Logistics became the gold standard, not just for efficiency, but for integrity. 5 years later. Richard Sterling sat in the visitors' room of the correctional facility. He looked older, greyer. He picked up the phone on the glass partition. Sarah sat on the other side. She looked exactly the same, calm, composed, unpretentious. "Why did you come?" Richard asked, his voice raspy. "I wanted to bring you this," Sarah said. She held up a magazine to the glass. Time magazine. The cover was a picture of Sarah, standing in front of a fleet of electric trucks. The headline read, "The Era of Transparency." "You won," Richard said bitterly. "You took everything." "I didn't take anything, Richard," Sarah said, putting the magazine down. "I built something. That's the difference between us. You thought power was about hoarding. money, secrets, control. But power is about flow. It's about making sure things get to where they need to go. She stood up. "I deposited some money in your commissary account," she said. "Enough for coffee." "Sarah," Richard called out as she turned to leave. Was I ever actually the boss?" Sarah paused. She looked back at the man who had once thought he owned the world. "You were the owner, Richard," she said softly, "but you were never the leader." She walked out of the prison into the bright spring sunlight. Her car was waiting. Kevin was in the driver's seat. "Where to, boss?" Kevin asked. Sarah looked at the horizon, where the skyline of Chicago rose like a promise. "Forward, Kevin," she said. "We have work to do." So, what do you think? Richard and Chuck thought they were untouchable because they had the suits, the titles, and the arrogance. They laughed at Sarah because she was quiet, because she followed the rules, and because she was just an employee. But in the end, they learned the hardest lesson of all. The person who knows how the machine works is far more powerful than the person who just owns the keys. Sarah didn't use violence or illegal schemes. She used competence as her weapon and transparency as her shield. If you enjoyed this story of karma and the ultimate corporate takedown, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Comment below, would you have forgiven Richard in the end, or did he get exactly what he deserved? I'll be reading your replies. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.